Welcome back to Taverns and Caverns. This is video 2 in the Play Along campaign series, and today we're going to be designing some encounters for session 0, so stick around. When planning your encounters for a session, make sure that you start by identifying the specific outcomes you are driving towards. Since there is no established narrative as of yet, you as DM have a wide range of options and don't have to worry too much about managing the direction of role-playing. After all, this is session 0. This is your chance to introduce the players to the mechanics of the game and the world at large. Anything beyond that is just kind of bonus. Our 3 primary objectives for session 0 include introducing our characters to the world through our NPCs, introducing our players to the mechanics of the world, and achieving second level. Every time you design your encounters, think back to your player characters and identify as much as you can about their abilities and playstyles. This will not only help in the creation of appropriate challenges relative to their skill sets, but by exploring their vulnerabilities periodically, you will encourage them to grow their approach to gaming. So my players are still building their characters, but I do know that we are going to have 4 players, and I know that one is leaning towards fighter or barbarian, and another is leaning towards sorcerer or wizard. That means we are going to have to make sure to address the full range of combat types, as well as some unique class features. All my players are brand new to D&D, although not everyone is completely new to RPGs in general, and one person is even experienced with tabletop wargames. I should keep the session short and sweet to accommodate all the asides for questions and answers that are sure to come up. Not really knowing what their playing styles are, I will use the fact that all players have a good sense of humor to find a flavor for this encounter. I think I will lean heavily on exaggerated personalities with my NPCs and keep the encounters fast and funny. This should help ensure that everyone has fun while learning some of the more tedious rules of the game. As a DM, you are responsible for role-playing all of the NPCs in your campaign, so keep that in mind as you design your encounters. A handful of very well-crafted characters that have dynamic interactions with your players will be far more memorable and enjoyable than complicated interwoven plots involving dozens of characters that your players only get to interact with once or twice. Also, when you do have to introduce randoms or give names to a red shirt or a monster that was not intended for social interaction with your players, keep a list of male and female names and assign personalities you are familiar with from other works of fiction or even real life. The most important tier of NPCs are the ones that provide conflict or resolution to the characters through their interactions. Rather than assigning the role of friend or foe to these NPCs, I find it best to focus on developing realistic motivations and finding angles to insert the player characters within their sphere of influence. This allows for the players to discover the backstories and intrigue gradually as a product of their interaction and decide for themselves who to align with or who to oppose. Building the story around the relationships that emerge through the player interaction makes for great role-playing and keeps the plot centered around the consequences of the character actions rather than just being along for the ride. Some of your NPCs are there mostly to serve as a function to your player characters rather than propel a plot. These human resources tend to be inherently neutral to your character and will usually serve as a vendor of supplies, a place to rest, or provide some other utility to your players. There is no need to make these characters one-dimensional, however. I really like developing backstories that provide for some kind of comic relief or exposition, so that there is more to the interaction than just exchanging coin or a simple task. Your world is mostly populated by nameless masses of humanoids that are either unaware or indifferent towards your player's existence. These will primarily serve as your innocent bystanders, your enemy grunts, and angry mobs. Remember to have some basic notes on the types of red shirts your players might encounter in your session, and have some general stat blocks and/or options for interactions sketched out in advance. Captain Farouk Briscoe, Commanding Officer. The leader of Delta Squad is a towering human male of exotic complexion with a scarred face and eye patch over his right socket. I imagine his personality somewhere between Samuel L. Jackson and R. Lee Ermey, a loud and foul-mouthed bulldog of a man with a surprisingly quick wit and an underlying compulsion to protect his subordinates, even if that means scaring the shit out of them and belittling them constantly. A multi-class fighter of 4th level and a rogue of 2nd level, with a soldier's background, Captain Briscoe defected from a military power far in the eastern region of the world, and journeyed to his current status in an up-and-coming mercenary company known as the Crimson Cloaks via a brief foray in hired thuggery. His experiences working in the underbelly of civilization have soured him towards treachery and subterfuge, and he cherishes the opportunity to engage in legitimate adventuring through his new career as a mercenary. He does his best to instill discipline and respect for the chain of command in his squad and does not tolerate deviation from the rules of honorable warfare. Equipped with a longsword, a hooked hand, and a few eldritch spells up his sleeve, Captain Briscoe is an intimidating figure in battle. This combined with his stealth and cunning, the captain is infamous for his ability to execute missions against impossible odds deep within enemy territory. Although not very friendly with his subordinates, in fact his leadership style is almost sadistic in its harshness, there's a deep level of compassion and concern for his soldiers forming the foundations of his actions. The player characters will find it easy to get on his shit list through failure to strictly follow his orders, but conversely, will earn his respect and loyalty through discipline, perseverance, and honor. Interactions with Captain Briscoe are intense as he has a habit of digging under the skin of his recruits in an effort to push them harder, challenging their weaknesses and ignorance to force epiphanies or humility onto the stubborn. Not always mean, but definitely abrasive, your characters should feel like they are trying to stay on his good side. The captain's right-hand man, Sergeant Driskins, is a lanky man with handsome, albeit delicate features, and his eloquence of speech and polite mannerisms make him unseemly as a military man. The captain frequently mocks his erudite disposition and fancy way of speaking, but will not stand for any disobedience towards his assistant from the lower ranks, unless of course it results in a hearty laugh. He hates his nickname Zip, as Zippoline is a very noble name where he is from. Highly respected for his skills as an archer and tactician, Sergeant Driskins is otherwise unremarkable as a soldier and is typically thought of as less than handy in battle. I imagine his personality as a combination of Colonel Hans Landa from Inglourious Bastards and Hugh Grant in Notting Hill. Someone with an awkward charm that is simultaneously grating and disarming, frequently condescending and amusing himself with small quips and inside jokes, all while maintaining a sense of politeness and dignity that belies his true purposes. His lack of prowess in hand-to-hand combat is the only flaw in his hidden identity as a 3rd-level rogue mastermind, multi-classed with 1 level of fighter just for appearances. The player character will find it tricky to unravel his true motivations, as Driskin is a very convincing assistant to his captain and is dutiful in the execution of training exercises and tending to the logistics of the squad. No one suspects that he may be working towards some secret end, whether it be sinister or sanctioned by some higher good. Armed with a heavy crossbow and a rapier, Sergeant Driskins is apt to lead from a position of cover, utilizing his ability to help as a bonus action while picking off enemies with bolts from afar. On base, Driskin leads training in range combat and can otherwise be found studying papers and charts in his office. Interactions with Sergeant Driskins are likely to be brief, as he is always busy with some task of his own or the captain's design. He tries to maintain amiability with his subordinates, but will tire of pleasantries if he meets resistance of any kind and is quick to dole out extra responsibilities to those that give him any guff or interfere with the fulfillment of his requests. He will offer expert help in training exercises if approached respectably, but he will certainly talk down to the players. Specialist Agnes Goldwater, Quartermaster. The surly but lovable elderly lady that serves as the base's quartermaster and commissary clerk is equally parts Mrs. Doubtfire and Lily Tomlin's Ernestine the telephone operator. She lovingly chides the new cadets on base while providing them with equipment, selling them personal effects, and slinging company gossip. Less an enemy or an ally, she is there to serve as a resource to the characters regardless of their alignments, although she may not always react with grace and poise to the PCs that give her any guff. Agnes loves the captain and respects him very deeply. Sergeant Driskin's less so, but she lovingly encourages him to become more soldierly and less stuffy. She never leaves the comfort of her desk in the supply warehouse, but somehow always knows everything that is going on the base, although getting that information out of her will take some kind words and significant patience. Interactions with Specialist Goldwater should always come with a few sarcastic jokes coupled with a small kindness in some form of a freebie from the commissary. Extra rations, for example. Her presence is like the comic relief of this encounter, as well as providing some insight into the captain, the sergeant, and the Crimson Cloaks in general should your player characters explore these details. The Delta Squad cadets include 11 red shirts and our 4 player characters. The Crimson Cloaks Delta Squad is reserved for new recruits and low-level cadets. It has a reputation for being a crucible in which mercenaries are refined from raw ore to the strongest steel. This reputation is the pride of Captain Briscoe, but comes at a high cost. Less than half of the new recruits survive their first year of contract. Of course, this might be why they can afford to pay so well to those that do make it to the end of the contract. Our characters are among 11 other people who signed such contracts of service to the Crimson Cloaks in hopes of riches and adventures, and a few who really had nothing better to do with their lives anyway. There are 5 fighters, 3 rogues, 2 rangers, and a sorcerer among the recruits, and not a strong personality trait amongst them. They are all too shell-shocked or homesick from the stresses of basic training to provide any significant help or hindrance to your player characters in this session. But if interacted with, the experience should seem like a collage of military boot camp cliches. Prepare a table of names and basic NPC info, and use the stat blocks for humanoid creatures in the back of the DMG if necessary. Non-combat feats of strength, agility, or cunning are a great way to add epic obstacles to your story without getting caught up in 30 to 45 minutes of combat. They can add flavor to your game by exaggerating a thematic motif or taking your environmental setting to epic scale. Skill challenges can be a simple nuisance to your player's progress or create a complex detour in which the PCs must gather info or resources to overcome. This session will only require a small scenario in which our players can try out the basics of physical ability and skill checks. To that end, and given our military-based setting, I think an obstacle course is the most obvious way to go. Successful completion of this obstacle course will be a requisite to their training as members of the Crimson Cloaks and will result in the rewarding of experience points. The first will be a simple platform jump that will require them to clear a moat without falling into the water by completing a short series of jumps followed by either long jumping or swinging from a rope to reach the end. This will demonstrate how jumping and movement work together to navigate the environment. The next obstacle will be a 40-foot wall climb with difficult holds and an optional hidden door that can be discovered and teased open with thieves' tools or a mage hand to avoid the strength check. The last obstacle will be carrying a heavy weight while balancing on a high beam. The weight will be attached via a chain to a pulley that opens a door on the other side of the beam. The PCs must carry the weight across the beam to fully open the door and then jump through the door before the chain goes slack, dropping the door. This obstacle can also be beat by disabling the trap or sneaking through somebody else's door once opened. To make things more epic, this obstacle course will take place in a hidden sea cave beneath the island base. Consequences for failure in these challenges will result in a modest amount of bludgeoning damage at worst, to getting wet and being extremely embarrassed at best. Battling monsters is one of the single most important parts of playing D&D, and the combat encounter will be anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of any given session. In this zero session, We are providing 2 short combat encounters to demonstrate the basics of melee and range combat respectively. Successful completion of these 2 combat exercises will provide experience points to our player characters. Captain Briscoe will conduct the training of all 4 PCs in melee combat along with 2 red shirts, as he orders the performance and teaches the basics of initiative, making attacks, flanking, opportunity attacks, ready actions, movement, etc. This will take place in a fighting ring located in the center of the island base, and will result in the awarding of experience points. Sergeant Driskins will lead range combat training for both weapons and spellcasting alike. He will cover the basics as well as attacking obscured targets, shooting beyond range, and he will be conducting the training on the side of the base on a kind of waterside driving range, with little islands for targets and distance markers in big letters. For Session 0, there's going to be limited room for storytelling and narrative building, so stick to character interaction and detailed descriptions of their actions throughout the training exercise as your primary method of keeping your players immersed in the experience. One of the best ways to keep your narrative off rails and encouraging player participation is to make the various encounters in your session nonlinear in nature. Problems are not always solved sequentially, and sometimes don't even require all the puzzle pieces to get the picture. So even in this very limited set of encounters, we are going to let our players tackle the session in whatever order they wish. Other than learning how to play and achieving a second level, the only other consequence of this session will be in the relationships they establish with their superior officers and, to a lesser extent, the rest of the squad. Keep an eye out for opportunities to bring out conflicts and relationships where possible that can be continued in the next session. After completing training and taking a long rest for leveling up and regeneration, the PCs will find themselves and the rest of Delta Squad getting shipped out to their first assignment. The destination is Need to Know. After all, we need time and space to react to our PC choices and to plan out our next set of encounters. Thanks again for joining us here at Taverns and Caverns. I hope you enjoyed the second video in the Play Along campaign series, in which we learn to design some encounters. Join us next time, where we will be learning how to run Session 0 in your new campaign. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.